Hey there everybody, welcome to your deck tech for unfinished business. This of course is going to be how I run this particular pile, how I have slimmed it down to 60 cards, what I take into battle. Now there are, I think, 3 different ways that you could build this deck, different cards that are going to play into 3 different strategies. I actually think that 2 of those kind of are one strategy, and if you try and separate them out, you get into kind of a little bit of trouble. The thing with this deck and the main design rule that I went with is that too many mechanics, too many cooks in the kitchen is going to kill you. That's something that I had to relearn in Paper Magic when I got back into it, and that's one of the reasons why I became such a good deck builder in Paper Magic. And I think that that was one of my strong suits. I wasn't always the best player, but I think that my deck builds were really pretty effective, and one of the reasons why that is that I always kept it down to just 1 mechanic or 2 mechanics. Almost like when you build with colors, you want to try and keep that at a minimal so that you can play more effectively. And I kind of did the same thing with all my decks, and I definitely did the same thing here. Now, as I was saying, there's a couple different ways that you could build this deck, but I think that the most effective thing, and what you don't want to do at all, is to try and cram them all into one 60-card build. You have to separate them out. And I think what some people are having trouble with this deck is they see a lot of good cards that could go in a couple different directions, and they just kind of cram them in here. Like I was saying, keeping it simple is one of the most important things about deck building, and learning about your icons and stuff is also important. So I really reduced this down to just kind of a bash, quick attack kind of ramp deck. And that is the manner in which I built this. We'll talk a little bit about the other 2, really one strategy that you could go with when we go upstairs to see what's staying home, but I want to talk about what we're bringing into battle first and what actually made the 60, starting with a 4-pack of Putrid Imps. Now this card is really going to run this deck in the early game. It's going to allow you to get those cards into the yard at instant speed. You can activate this whenever, so if your opponent, if you're in the mirror, and your opponent has an Exhume, for example, or if they're playing zombies and they're crazy enough to run that card, then you're going to be able to instant speed drop something into the yard if Putrid Imp is on the field, and then bring it right into the field, so it's a fantastic card. The flying is also super relevant, though extra 1 or 2 damage is going to be important for you in a lot of cases. Not to mention the fact that this card also gels really well with one of our late game bombs. Remember the fact that we're going to be able to give this thing flying at almost instant speed. Of course, we have to do that before blockers are declared, but if we are able to do that and he is unblocked, then we'll be able to combo off in another way. So this is actually a combo piece in 2 different ways, and he's a pretty good card regardless, because he's going to be able to do that 1 damage pretty frequently. Always remember to, if you're going to discard something, don't really need to do it at the end of their turn. You can always do it on your turn, so that you can get that extra 1 damage across in the air. This guy's probably not going to be blocking early game, and remember that threshold means that he's going to be almost useless late game as a body. He's not going to be chump blocking down because he'll get +1/+1 and can't block. So it's important to remember that once you get those 7 cards in the yard, this guy's going to be almost useless because your opponent at that point is probably going to have creatures that can block this guy. So remember that and keep that in mind. Next, we're going to be talking about how many Doomblades I run. Now, we all know how good of a card Doomblade is. It's fantastic. It's going to just be a 2-mana instant speed removal spell, which you really can't beat. It does have that caveat, though, of target non-black creature, which I think is actually a pretty big deal and is why I run 2 of them. Now, arguments can be made for 3 of these cards. I like to have a little bit more room and a little bit extra slot, that 1 extra slot, to kind of allow me a little bit more freedom with the amount of creatures I have. You can see that I have 18 creatures in there. Doomblade, the 3rd Doomblade almost takes the place of one of those creatures, and I do not want that to happen. Now, of course, removal is important, but it is counterintuitive to the Exhumes and the other stuff that we're going to be doing. We can kind of get rid of stuff in their yard, but that's at a little bit later in the walkthrough of this deck. Doomblade's a fantastic card. I think 2 is the perfect amount in here. I think less than that would be kind of questionable. You do need that removal for stuff that you can't handle. And 3, I just think is a little too much of a good thing. Exhume, the 4-pack, of course. This card is fantastic. Turn 2, if we're lucky enough to have this guy out on turn 1, then turn 2 can be absolutely uncomfortable for our opponent. This is a fantastic card. It does have that little a negative. In a lot of decks, it's got a little negative because your opponent gets to put a card from his or her graveyard onto the field, a creature card. But 9 times out of 10, what they have in their yard is not going to be as good as what you have in your yard, especially early game. There's a really good chance that you'll have a great creature in your yard and they will have nothing in theirs if you're playing this deck the right way, because you can just chump block down, you're not going to be killing anything with Putrid Imp, and then the Exhume just goes off. Most times they're just going to get something terrible out of their yard. Of course, now there are decks with like Path to Exile and stuff like that. You don't want to give them that freebie where they get something out of their yard and you don't. So just remember that there are things that don't necessarily send your creatures back to the yard. Luckily, most of the big guys that we're going to be playing later on give us bonus effects when they enter the battlefield, so that's going to be good enough for 2 mana. Next, we're going to talk about Damir Doppelganger. This card's fantastic because it's going to completely exile the card from graveyard. It's going to allow you to play those Exhumes because you can point this guy at one of your opponent's cards, the scariest card in their graveyard, and then play your Exhume without qualms. You're going to be able to just drop that thing. And that's only for 5 mana if this guy's been out for a turn. I would like to say that for 6 mana you can play and activate this ability instantaneously because it is not a tap effect. Other things that are important to note with this card are the fact that it becomes a copy of that card, and that means that this thing is not going to have Summoning Sickness if it has been out for a turn. So if you play it on one of your turns, you pass to your opponent, the pass back to you, this thing doesn't have Summoning Sickness anymore. You can attack in as a 0/2 if you want. If they don't block it because they think you're crazy, you can go ahead and use that exile ability, bring something back into the yard, or back onto the field. And also, you can do that before attack step to get a flyer or something with evasion, and then attack in unencumbered because this thing will not have Summoning Sickness. It's really a utility card in this deck. It's fantastic in the mirror match. It's great in almost every respect because it's going to be able to weed out powerful cards from your opponent's graveyard, and it becomes them at the same time, so that's fantastic. Hidden Horror, I run 4 of. This guy is a 4/4 for 3, and he feeds into the deck mechanic, which is discarding big creatures. This guy is just great. He's a really strong body early game. Mid game, he's going to be able to do some blocks, maybe be a little bit of removal if your opponent has a big creature out. In late game, he's going to allow you to immediately get rid of a card and hopefully combo off because you'll have much more than 3 mana at that point, hopefully. We do run quite a few lands, 24. Of course, we don't run any of the cheapo lands, which we can just go ahead and, we can just go ahead and take a look at those in cost, because we are very correctly balanced here with the 11 and 13, which is really great. We don't have to wait around for those lands to tap or anything, but that's more about what we're talking about late game or what we're leaving home. Moving on, so we got 4 of those. Moving on, we've got 1 of Victimize. Choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard. Sacrifice a creature. If you do, return the chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. I've never really had occasion to use this, to be honest with you. It's a super powerful card, especially in this deck. I've just never seen it. I think I've drawn it once, but it was so late in the game that I didn't need its effect. Of course, at 3 mana, we could go ahead and ditch 2 cards with Putrid Imp, and then immediately sack it and bring them back onto the field. So if we saw it early game, it'd be fantastic. Mid game, it's also good. In late game, of course, it's good as well if we don't have our big guys out. Super late, though, if we're about to get punched, the fact that they come into the battlefield tapped is something to keep in mind. It's a really good card, and I'm happy when I see it. I just haven't had the good fortune to use it a lot yet. Sift, hopefully we use it in this week. Sift I run 4 of. This is my draw engine in this deck. Now, of course, there are different ways to kind of draw cards in this thing. There is a build we'll talk about in a little bit where you can just really focus on card draw. But Sift is my draw engine of choice because we're going to draw 3 cards and then we get to discard 1 of them. And if we've got too many cards in hand, if we use this when we're sitting on 7, we get to discard more than that, which is kind of what we want to do here. It's really just cycling and putting stuff in the yard. And that's why Sift is so powerful, because it's 3 cards that we get to have in our hand, and then we get to pick what we want to put in the yard. It's super good. Lots of times you're going to be able to sift into another sift, and you can keep that around, get rid of 2 creatures maybe, depending on how many cards you have in your hand, and really just get going. This thing is a fantastic draw engine. It's the best draw engine in this pile, so that is definitely what I want to take into battle with me. Diabolic Tutor, of course, lots of times I almost don't know what to tutor for because this deck is so powerful, but Tutor, of course, is fantastic. We run 1 of them because they give us 1 of them. It's a great card. Beacon of Unrest is amazing because it's going to allow us to reuse that effect. It's 5 mana, so it costs just as much as something like Rise from Grave. We can also do it with artifacts. Yes, we can. Which is actually pretty useful, if only for the fact that we can get something out of our opponent's yard. I mean, we don't really have a way to put it in there, but if it's like a sack effect or something like that, then we can go ahead and grab that and utilize it ourselves, or just keep them from getting it back. So that's definitely worthwhile. I don't think there are too many mechanics in the lexicon of this game in 2014 that really utilize that artifacts stuff so much, but it's nice to just have that in there, of course, and the fact that this is reusable to get creatures is really what makes it fantastic. There's some combos we can do later with Demon that is pretty sick. Living Death is a fantastic card in this deck. You want to be very careful when and how you use it. We'll definitely see this thing throughout the week because we will be playing this deck. And it's really going to showcase its true power there because it can be kind of a killer. You want to be really careful when you're using it. Of course, it does work very well with Doppelganger and those kinds of things where we can control what our opponent gets back on the field. We just have to be extra mindful when we drop this thing. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the right play and the best play. But if we have something like really targeted instead of just Living Death, sometimes that's even better. Now, we can use Rise from Grave to grab one of their creatures from the yard, put it on our side of the field, and then Living Death. And that way that creature's dead, it doesn't come back. I mean, there's lots of really complicated and intricate scenarios that we can get into that we'll talk more about throughout the week. Living Death is a fantastic card. I run both of those. Now, I run 3 Rise from Graves. That's one short of the full pack that they give us access to. I really took that one out in favor of Beacon of Unrest because it's a better version of Rise from Grave. It actually costs the same amount as well. You know, there's just a little bit different of what that CMC breaks down into because this is actually 2 swamps. But that's not really a problem for us that late in the game. Rise from Grave is just a good old-fashioned card. It allows us to bring something back from their yard or our yard, and it makes it black in addition, which means that if they have their own little kind of, if we get rid of Kega or something like that, or maybe Sphinx gets killed, then if we bring it back with Rise from Grave, then their Doomblades and some of their removal will not be able to take effect and kill that card, that creature. So it's actually pretty great that that happens. Also, unfortunately though, if we needed to gank our own Kega in order to grab one of their creatures, we can't do that after a Rise from Grave. Speaking of that though, that is one of the main uses of this Dragon Spirit. If we play this thing and our opponent is going to do something crazy, like maybe they are going to exile it. They've got Swords to Plowshares or something like that. Probably not in this, but whatever. They have some way to get rid of Kega. Then what we're going to do in that instance is we can actually kill that with our own Doomblade and gain control of one of their creatures. The other spell would fizzle. It's pretty awesome. It's just a good time for everyone. I enjoy it. They don't so much, but Keg is also a 5/5 guy who's just going to be really annoying because they are a little... They don't want to kill it. Let's put it that way. I'm not going to say they don't want to kill it just flat out because there are some opponents that aren't as afraid of that. Depending on who you're playing online, though, this guy can get across the table and do a lot of damage to certain people. This thing it's a big pain for them. Of course, that exile is going to null that, and there's a lot of cards and a lot of decks that, you know, Fiend Hunter's going to put this underneath it. That effect's not going to go off. It's very, very specifically when it dies, so it couldn't be abused in blue decks at the time. But it's also a great card in this particular build. We can utilize it several times and not have a problem. Sphinx is a fantastic card because it lets me draw cards. I don't care about the +1/+1 garbage. Evasion's great, and the fact that it's a 6/6 is pretty good. But the fact that I'm going to draw cards at my opponent's end step is disgusting, especially in this deck, because if I draw over 7, I just get to pitch good guys and bring them back for less mana. This late in the game, though, of course, basically if you get to untap with them, you get 2 cards. But this late in the game, of course, I'm probably going to be able to just play those guys outright, so the discard factor isn't really in there. But of course we can play this guy early too when we only have 3 mana, and then that draw is going to be a big factor at that point as well. This is one of the people I was talking about when we can get evasion, so there's lots of different ways that we can get that guy out there. Let's read him real quick just in case you guys are unaware. We run 2 of this guy because he's amazing. This guy almost drives the deck. When Silent Blade Oni deals damage to a player, look at the player's hand. You can cast a non-land card, any non-land card in it, without paying the card's mana cost. So it's absolutely any card in our opponent's hand we can go ahead and play. This is one of the things I was talking about earlier. We're going to be able to use that instant speed with Damir Doppelganger. It's going to be able to do that damage. We're going to grab it out of the hand. And that's great because that only costs 3. Now, of course, this thing has Ninjutsu, which means that for the 6 mana, we can go ahead and basically do that same thing. Unblocked creatures. If you're not familiar with Ninjutsu, it's one of my favorite mechanics from this era. And it's if a creature is not blocked, you're able to play the Ninjutsu cost. You return the unblocked creature to your hand. You place this card in its place, tapped and attacking and unblocked, which is going to allow you to utilize that ability. But that costs 6, whereas using Doppelganger's ability only costs 3, so that's going to have the cost. And of course, Putrid Imp is going to allow us, if we have the 6 mana and we're able to give it the flying, that's what's going to combo off there. Now, we were also talking about this card. We're going to talk about another combo piece here in a second. Beacon of Unrest and our Rune-Scarred Demon. This guy is amazing because he's actually going to just grab anything out of our deck, which means that if he dies, we can just grab Beacon of Unrest. And then if he dies again, we can just grab Beacon of Unrest. And we can do that ad infinitum until our opponent runs out of removal, and then on the final Rune Scarred, we'll be able to get anything else of our choosing. This guy's also fantastic because he's able to get you, your Living Death or, any of the other stuff that's out there. He's a fantastic card. He's really one of the drivers of this deck as well. He's going to help you out in a lot of situations, plus he's a 6/6 with evasion. Speaking of evasion, this is a guy that almost never attacks, but also happens to have it. Tidespout Tyrant is a fantastic card. Whenever we cast any spell at all, which is another reason why I love having the 2 Doomblades, we are able to bounce a permanent to its owner's hand. We can aim this at our own guys in case something crazy is going on the field, but my favorite thing to do with this, is, multiple lands rejected to our opponent's hand in one turn. That doesn't happen so often. I mean, we don't have a ton of low-cost cards, which means that we don't always get to utilize that multiple times in a turn, and that's really the only reason that I would want to put lands into my opponent's hand, is if I could do it like 2 to 3 times in one turn. What this is great for is that it's double removal. If we have Doomblade, we get to kill one creature, unsummon one, so Tidespout Tyrant's fantastic in that regard. Xion the Darkness is another fantastic card. This thing's got trample and anything that blocks it. This is important to talk about. It's also got cycling, which is great in this deck. I don't even understand why they gave us this guy, because the ability to play him early game and get a card out of it is kind of disgusting. But this guy is going to get a card out of our opponent's graveyard, and we'll be able to put it on the battlefield. Well, the best thing about that is that anything that is used to block this guy, he's got trample, so they're going to have to use a lot. But anything that's used to block this guy, we get to grab as well, because it's dead at the point that that effect takes place. So they wouldn't chump block it, but they block down with like 5 guys or 6 guys or something like that to kill this thing. We get one of those dudes. It's not always fantastic, but it is worth mentioning. If their yard is empty, we still get at least one guy if they block it. And then finally, we got Demon of Death's Gate. Now, this is something that I hem and hawed about. I didn't always want to put it in, but it is flying trample, and it is a 9/9, so it ends up in there. There's really not many more effects. Like, I love my Enter the Battlefield or my silly effects. You guys know that about me at this point, and a lot of our bombs come in those shapes, sizes, and varieties. But this guy, he doesn't do anything when he comes in the battlefield other than make our opponents shit themselves. Like, it might as well read that underneath flying and trample. If they do not have an answer for this, and if we're able to play him early enough, then it's really gonna wreck their entire lives. It's a great card. It's a lot of fun to play. So that's basically the 60. That is what I run. This is the build, like I said, that's the acceleration bash technique. The other build that you can run in this is the draw card stall version, which the stall is going to come in the form of these undermines and stuff like that. Draw card stall doesn't work as well, and we could play a version of that deck later on, and I could kind of show you why I think that it's a little bit wishy-washy. I think that this is just plain stronger down here. But the draw card stall can be split up into just a stall deck or just a draw card deck. I think that they work better together, and I think it gets a little bit muddled there at the same time, though. So that's why most of these are staying up here. They're great cards, by and large. Everything they gave us in the stack is pretty good, except for Evolving Wilds. But these are just a little bit different, not really what we're trying to do down here in the core. So I know a lot of you guys like to point out individual card strengths, and that's great to do. Please keep doing that. But just keep in mind, when you're commenting and saying those kind of things, that we went for a very specific idea or technique in this bottom build. So even though there might be fantastic cards up top, it's not really something that we want to be doing in our particular games. Speaking of reanimate, I mean, we know why Evolving Wilds is out. I don't run Evolving Wilds. Now that we can do this, I don't run Evolving Wilds in 2-mana decks. I think it's a complete waste. If you properly balance your mana, you're not going to be missing these guys. Now, do I wish I had some, shock lands or something like that? Yes. I would love to have that ability, but I'm not going to play in Evolving Wilds because it just takes too long for me to get that benefit. And in this deck, where I really want to be on curve, to be honest with you, I just don't think the Evolving Wilds is necessary. Speaking to reanimate, I just don't want to lose the life. I don't have any way to gain life in this deck, and sometimes it does come down to those last couple turns. The reanimate's just too much damage to me early on when I don't really need to take it. I mean, I don't want to go back through all the cards down here. But we have so many different ways of getting cards out of my yard that does not require me to take damage. I just think it's a little wild to put this one in here. Of course, it's 3 more options, but this deck is so full. What do we cut? The Hidden Horror? That gives us nothing to get with Reanimate. The draw card, I mean, there's just not room for Reanimate in this. It's either, we could get rid of the Rise from Grave, but it's just not from a graveyard onto the battlefield under control. The life loss is just too much for me. We have early game ways of getting cards onto my side of the field, and I just don't think that the Reanimate's worth it. It's a great card in 90% of the situations. I just don't think it's fantastic in this deck. This I don't enjoy because my opponent can do it, and they know what I'm doing. So Exhume is pretty much dead if I play this. So definitely not. That's not going to happen. Because they'd just be like, oh, hey, he's going to Exhume, so I can just use this Una's Prowler, or whatever the hell this is. Oh, that's the Fairy Queen from the other deck. Not great. I mean, it's an okay card, obviously. It can bash your opponent. You can have some fun with that. It's flying for 2 mana, 3/1. That's always pretty much a good time. But this guy is just giving too much power to my opponent. Accumulated Knowledge doesn't fit here because it doesn't allow me to discard that card. A lot of these cuts, now that I'm looking at them, were in favor of what I believe are just better versions of these cards. Of course, this is cheaper and it's instant speed, but it doesn't allow me to discard that card. It's kind of a beater. I'm never happy to draw that first one because it just cantrips. And then the second one, it just takes too long to ramp up. And I know that I said that before when I was unlocking the cards. Before I got the full play set, I didn't want to run these guys. I did play several games once I had the full play set unlocked and I had them down in here. I just don't have the room for these guys. And like I said, they kind of run in that stall and card draw build. And that's not what I want to be doing. Third Doomblade we already talked about. See Beyond I don't even want to talk about. You draw 2 cards, you shuffle a card from your hand into your library. I mean, it's not bad, but I don't really need it. I'm not going to cut. What would I cut? I'd want to cut one of my 18 spells because the creature ratio is really important in here. I'm definitely not cutting my removal or my exhumes. I'm not cutting any of my recursion for that. And I'm certainly not going to cut the better card draw for that. So that guy stays upstairs. He's also a sorcery, so screw that. Distress, they discard it. They don't exile it, so Distress, that's not happening. Damir Cutpurse is another card that they are going to be discarding cards. The opposite build to this is going to really have a lot of this discard stuff in here. It's going to run all 3 Doomblades, all of your card draw, maybe one more land. I probably think I would keep it at 24. I might change the ratio a little bit though, because you want the double for the distress. Because the other alternate build for this is not going to rely on these exhumes. It's going to really rely on the late game Rise from Grave type stuff. So you get to put in your Distresses and your Damir Cutpurse and your Cunning Lethomancer into that particular build. But in my build that I'm running, these guys are just giving my opponent too many opportunities to get cards in the yard. I don't like that at all. And, 2 of these they get to choose. We get to choose on this one, which is nice. But Doom Necromancer I don't need. He's instant speed, but I've got other better ways of getting stuff out of my yard already that I don't have to worry about some of the stuff with Doomed Necromancer. So I don't really like to mess with that guy. This also goes into that alternate build where we're stalling out our opponents. Another way to throw stuff into the yard that we can get later on with our Rise from Graves that we would have. It's also just a hilarious card. I really wanted to run a one of in here, and for a while it was in instead of Victimize, but oh god, you know, I still think about that change. It's just a wild one of. Undermine is a lot of fun to just put in here, and since I almost never see Victimize, it's easy for me to make the call to just toss the Undermine in here. But I'd rather see Victimize, I guess. I love undermining people with this deck though, because they never expect it. We might go through and build that alternate build. I don't think it runs as well, but it is a shit ton of fun to play. So we might go ahead and look at that later on, you guys. Just maybe after this week, maybe just on a Friday or something like that, or the weekend as a throwaway video. But Undermine's a lot of fun. I like it. They lose 3 life. It's pretty good. Consult the Necrosages lets you draw cards or discard cards. I told you I already got my card draw suite down here. I don't really need this one. I could also put that in instead of Victimize. I mean, this is kind of where I falter with my Victimize play, but I'll still leave that in there. Windfall, I don't even know what this does. Some shit and draw cards. Oh yeah, yep, no. There's a reason why I read that once and was like, I don't think so. Gas Lord of the Fugue is not as good as the other dudes that I have. I've got bigger, better, badder boys, so they stay in there. Body Double's great, I just don't have space for him at all. Like, I tried, I really did try to put that guy in here, and it just did not happen for me. So he's upstairs. Kelpie, I love the name, I just want an excuse to say that more often, and I actually did take Victimize out for this guy for a couple games, just trying to make it work, but he doesn't fit, he doesn't really work. We don't actually get too many cards off of him. I don't like Fool's Demise, so it's upstairs. I mean, I don't know. Just to talk about why I don't like it. It's got recursion. It just costs so much. It's 5 mana. I don't know. I've got better things to do. Plus, if I play it on their guy, I still got to kill that guy before I get control of him. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of Fool's Demise. It's a good card. It's just not fitting. Rise from Grave, we already talked about. Rexiol, the Risen Deep. This guy is freaking Cthulhu, metal cover, insanely awesome. It looks like it almost looks like there's an eye in his arm, like he's just shoved he's wrist deep in a squid or something like that. I don't know what's going on with that card. He doesn't do stuff quick enough for me. He's got Island Walk and Swamp Walk. You could almost say put him in instead of Sphinx, but I still got to untap. Sphinx 5/9 mana, I know you guys. I'm reaching on this one. 5/9 mana, I can at least draw a card. Rexiol's just, he's always dead. Like, I've played him like twice, and he's just always dead. If he was pro blue, pro black, then I would run him. I'd rather just draw a bunch of cards. I gotta be honest with you. Either way, you're gonna be screwed if you're in the mirror and they have mind control or that fairy. You know, I think about that kind of stuff too, because that's what you need to think about when you're doing this. Like, this thing is going to make you so sad because there's no way for you to kill him. Like, that's one of the things that came into play on this, is that if you're playing against fairies and they have that 4-drop fairy that grabs a guy, sure, they can use Sphinx and they can draw some cards, but at least I have 2 Doomblades. Like, I can pray for a Doomblade. If they grab Rexiol, they just Rexiol me, and that's not what I want. It was Rex, whatever. I don't know. I like being able to kill stuff that they can mind control and then use fully, because I would not be able to block that thing. It would be getting stuff out of my graveyard. I would be feeling the fool. I don't want that to happen. I can just kill this thing if I need to. Cerulean Sphinx. That's a card. You can shuffle it in your library. I don't know why the fuck you would. Extract Demon. Well, I know why you would do that. I don't know why it would be down here, basically. That's what I'm saying. Extractor Demon's really good. That Unearth gives him haste, and you can punch your opponent for 5 for 3 mana, which is really great. People are like, hey, you should run that. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't have room. Like, I'm not taking out these guys. I guess you could take out Kega and Sphinx, but then that's my whole thing. Like, I don't want to get that guy. That guy's not winning me the game. Kega might. And this guy's good. He becomes huge when he's drawing cards. If they don't have a way to get rid of that thing, you can bash him for 8 next turn. It's disgusting. And if you have 9 mana, then you're bashing him for 9 next turn. I don't know. Live the dream. Well, no, you'd actually be bashing him for 10, right? I don't know. Math is a crazy thing that smart people do. I don't know. Like, Extractor Demon, I got to that point where it's going to be Extractor Demon instead of Hidden Horror. And I don't like that. Because you don't want the Extractor Demon instead of one of your big boys. Like, he doesn't replace any of these guys, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like, he's not coming in here instead of one of these guys. I'm definitely not going to play him instead of my way to get one of those guys. There's just not room at the end for that dude. I mean, you could take out Hidden Horror, but Hidden Horror lets you combo off as well. I really do like Extractor Demon. He was played a huge role in unlocking this deck. But at the end of the day, he's just not good enough for the final build. Now, the extra 5 damage, of course, is really good, but like I was saying, he's not going to replace one of these fantastic cards, that's for sure. Gather Specimens costs a ton. I don't know. It's, luck. That's more in the stall build, you know what I mean? Like I was saying, that's not something that this particular deck wants to be doing. This thing's got no tricks, so he's for kids. Stay away from me. Tidal Kraken can't be blocked, but he also can't do much of anything else. That guy's up there. Another Tidespout Tyrant, I got one of them, so I'm pretty happy with that. And then, you know, this thing costs 5,000 mana. But, I don't know, 5 mana. For 4 mana, you can kill everything, though. Like, I mean, if this was Wrath of God, you know, Damnation, I would be all over it. I'd be all about it. But it's not. It's just big, fat not Damnation with Cycling that is still not Damnation. So that's why that's out as well. That's my 60, you guys, and I'm sticking to it. I really enjoy this deck. I'm sure you guys have noticed. This is one of my favorite decks of 14 by a mile. I really enjoyed it. I've played it a ton, so I do stand behind my 60. But one of the reasons why this video I think is super long is that I had a lot of thought go into these decks, and there was more of a conversation going on with myself about each card that I left out and took into the fray. I want that conversation to be two-sided though, so hit up the comments and let me know what you would do to change this particular build, what you would do to this deck on your own time, and how you run it yourselves. I'm really interested to see what you guys think, and go ahead and address individual cards. Let me know what you think about the argument. I tried to give voice to both sides of it, so you can kind of make your own tweaks to this deck if you want to, but definitely let me know exactly what you guys are thinking down in the comments. I also want to wrap up this video by giving a shout out to Paul Gasparini. I hope that's how you say your last name. He is at As a Gameplay on the Twitter. That guy's awesome. He actually offered to foil all my decks, which would have been a huge grand gesture, and I really would have appreciated it, but you don't have to do that at all, man. I appreciate the thought for sure. Thank you very much. But it's not necessary, so thank you. And I really appreciate a couple of people have gifted me some foil keys before, which is awesome. I really enjoy running them. It's just that I don't want you to go out of your way to do it. Like, if you ask me first, I will almost always say there's no need to do that. I appreciate the thought, and I appreciate the people who have done it before. So there is that as well. And of course, there's also the Technovolver channel. Hit the link in the description. It's the very first line. That is also me and my buddy Andrew. We're putting up videos on that right now. There's also going to be a lot of reboots of the news show and old stuff that I used to do on this channel. What's Happening? My app review show is going to come back. I just jailbroke my phone, so we can be looking at stuff like that. That is really going to be a catch-all for all the fun other stuff that I do. This is really just a dedicated Magic channel now. There's going to be Let's Plays and stuff on there as well. Soon, very soon. That's all going to be happening. So please hit the link, watch both those videos that are up right now, and wait and stay tuned because we're going to be keeping up with that throughout the weeks and months and years to come. So please watch that if you would. I'd really appreciate it, and subscribe if you could. That would really help me out. Also, if you could share this video with your people that you know, that'd be great too. But for right now, guys, I want to just thank you, even if you don't do any of that, for watching this particular episode, and invite you to come back all throughout the week when we bust out Unfinished Business and beat the hell out of people. This deck does not lose often. I will say that. It is a great build, and it's a lot of fun. So please stay tuned and keep checking back while we get through some of that gameplay. Thanks a lot for watching, you guys. I'll see you all tomorrow.